Welcome to the Federalist number 10 class by the Grumpy Old Vet. This is lesson 13 in this series. This lesson will cover essay number 10 of 85 essays, all written to the people of the state of New York, in counter to the arguments of the anti-federalists, to convince the people of the 13 states to ratify the Constitution. Madison defines what is the enemy of all popular government, its causes, and how to deal with its effects. He shows why a republican form of government is superior to democracies that are short-lived and incompatible with individual liberty or property rights. With that, let's move out. Welcome to the class on Federalist Paper 10, brought to you by the Hillsdale Justice Project at Liberty Hall. Narrated by John Rutan. The same subject continued. The Union as a safeguard against domestic faction and insurrection. The Federalist number 10, 23rd November, 1787. Written by Madison for the Independent Journal, and as all 85 Federalist papers start out, to the people of the state of New York. Among the numerous advantages promised by a well-constructed union, none deserves to be more accurately developed than its tendency to break and control the violence of faction. The friend of popular governments never finds himself so much alarmed for their character and fate as when he contemplates their propensity to this dangerous vice. He will not fail, therefore, to set a due value on any plan which, without violating the principles to which he is attached, provides a proper cure for it. The instability, injustice, and confusion introduced into the public councils have, in truth, been the mortal diseases under which popular governments have everywhere perished, as they continue to be the favorite and fruitful topics from which the adversaries to liberty derive their most specious declamations. The valuable improvements made by the American constitutions on the popular models, both ancient and modern, cannot certainly be too much admired. But it would be an unwarrantable partiality to contend that they have as effectually obviated the danger on this side as was wished and expected. Complaints are everywhere heard from our most considerate and virtuous citizens, equally the friends of public and private faith, and of public and personal liberty, that our governments are too unstable, that the public good is disregarded in the conflicts of rival parties, and that measures are too often decided, not according to the rules of justice and the rights of the minor party, but by the superior force of an interested and overbearing majority. However anxiously we may wish that these complaints had no foundation, the evidence of known facts will not permit us to deny that they are in some degree true. It will be found, indeed, on a candid review of our situation, that some of the distresses under which we labor have been erroneously charged on the operation of our governments. But it will be found, at the same time, that other causes will not alone account for many of our heaviest misfortunes, and particularly for that prevailing and increasing distrust of public engagements and alarm for private rights, which are echoed from one end of the continent to the other. These must be chiefly, if not wholly, effects of the unsteadiness and injustice with which a factious spirit has tainted our public administrations. Among the many benefits of a well-structured union, one of the most important is its ability to control and reduce the harmful effects of factions. Those who support democratic governments are often most worried about the threat posed by factions. Therefore, they will value any plan that addresses this problem without undermining the core principles of democracy. The instability, injustice, and confusion caused by factions have historically led to the downfall of popular governments, and are often used by opponents of liberty to criticize such systems. While the American constitutions have made important improvements to popular government models, they haven't completely eliminated the threat posed by factions. Many thoughtful and virtuous citizens who support both public and private integrity and freedom, complain that our governments are too unstable, that the public good is often ignored in partisan struggles, and that decisions are often made by a majority that overpowers the minority, rather than based on justice and fairness. Although we may wish these complaints weren't true, the facts show that they have some basis. A closer look at our situation reveals that while some of our problems have been wrongly blamed on the government, many of our biggest issues, especially the growing distrust of public commitments and fears for individual rights, are largely the result of the instability and injustice caused by factionalism in our governments. By a faction, I understand a number of citizens, whether amounting to a majority or a minority of the whole, who are united and actuated by some common impulse of passion or of interest, adverse to the rights of other citizens or to the permanent and aggregate interests of the community. There are two methods of curing the mischiefs of faction. The one by removing its causes, the other by controlling its effects. There are again two methods of removing the causes of faction. The one by destroying the liberty which is essential to its existence, the other by giving to every citizen the same opinions, the same passions, and the same interests. A faction is a group of citizens, whether in the majority or minority, who are united by a common passion or interest that goes against the rights of others or the long-term well-being of the community. There are two ways to deal with the problems caused by factions. One is to remove their causes, and the other is to control their effects. To remove the causes of factions, there are two options. One is to take away the liberty that allows them to form, and the other is to make everyone have the same opinions, passions, and interests. It could never be more truly said than of the first remedy, that it was worse than the disease. Liberty is to faction what air is to fire, an aliment without which it instantly expires. But it could not be less folly to abolish liberty, which is essential to political life, because it nourishes faction, than it would be to wish the annihilation of air, which is essential to animal life, because it imparts to fire its destructive agency. It's clear that the first solution is worse than the problem itself. Liberty is to factions what air is to fire. It's what keeps them alive. To take away liberty, which is necessary for political life, just because it fuels factions, would be as foolish as wanting to eliminate air, which is essential to life, just because it helps fire spread. The second expedient is as impracticable as the first would be unwise. As long as the reason of man continues fallible, and he is at liberty to exercise it, different opinions will be formed. As long as the connection subsists between his reason and his self-love, his opinions and his passions will have a reciprocal influence on each other, and the former will be objects to which the latter will attach themselves. The diversity in the faculties of men, from which the rights of property originate, is not less an insuperable obstacle to a uniformity of interests. The protection of these faculties is the first object of government. From the protection of different and unequal faculties of acquiring property, the possession of different degrees and kinds of property immediately results. And from the influence of these on the sentiments and views of the respective proprietors, ensues a division of the society into different interests and parties. The second solution is just as impossible as the first is unwise. As long as people are capable of reasoning and are free to use it, they will form different opinions. As long as there is a link between reason and self-interest, people's opinions and emotions will influence each other. The differences in people's abilities, which lead to the rights to property, make it impossible for everyone to have the same interests. The main purpose of government is to protect these abilities. When people have different ways of acquiring property, they will naturally end up with different types and amounts of property, and these differences will shape their views and interests, creating divisions within society. The latent causes of faction are thus sown in the nature of man, and we see them everywhere brought into different degrees of activity, according to the different circumstances of civil society. A zeal for different opinions concerning religion, concerning government, and many other points, as well of speculation as of practice. An attachment to different leaders ambitiously contending for preeminence and power, or to persons of other descriptions whose fortunes have been interesting to the human passions, have, in turn, divided mankind into parties, inflamed them with mutual animosity, and rendered them much more disposed to vex and oppress each other than to cooperate for their common good. So strong is this propensity of mankind to fall into mutual animosities, that where no substantial occasion presents itself, the most frivolous and fanciful distinctions have been sufficient to kindle their unfriendly passions and excite their most violent conflicts. The root causes of factions are built into human nature, and we see them arise to varying degrees depending on the situation in society. People become passionate about different views on religion, government, and many other issues, whether theoretical or practical. They also get attached to different leaders fighting for power, or to individuals whose actions or fortunes stir up strong feelings. These factors have divided people into groups, fueling hostility between them, making them more likely to fight and oppress each other rather than work together for the common good. Human nature is so prone to conflict that even the smallest or most insignificant differences can stir up intense hatred and lead to violent disagreements. But the most common and durable source of factions has been the various and unequal distribution of property. Those who hold and those who are without property have ever formed distinct interests in society. Those who are creditors and those who are debtors fall under a like discrimination: a landed interest, a manufacturing interest, a mercantile interest, a moneyed interest, with many lesser interests, grow up of necessity in civilized nations and divide them into different classes, actuated by different sentiments and views. The regulation of these various and interfering interests forms the principal task of modern legislation and involves the spirit of party and faction in the necessary and ordinary operations of the government. The most common and lasting cause of factions is the unequal distribution of property. People who own property and those who don't have always had different interests in society. Similarly, creditors and debtors also have opposing interests. In civilized nations, different sectors such as landowners, manufacturers, merchants, and financiers, along with many smaller groups, naturally form and divide society into distinct classes with different views and goals. Managing these competing interests is a key task of modern lawmakers, and it inevitably brings party politics and factions into the everyday workings of government. No man is allowed to be a judge in his own cause, because his interest would certainly bias his judgment and, not improbably, corrupt his integrity. With equal, nay, with greater reason, a body of men are unfit to be both judges and parties at the same time. Yet what are many of the most important acts of legislation, but so many judicial determinations, not indeed concerning the rights of single persons, but concerning the rights of large bodies of citizens? And what are the different classes of legislators but advocates and parties to the causes which they determine? Is a law proposed concerning private debts? It is a question to which the creditors are parties on one side and the debtors on the other. Justice ought to hold the balance between them, yet the parties are, and must be, themselves the judges, and the most numerous party, or in other words, the most powerful faction, must be expected to prevail. No one should be a judge in their own case, because their personal interest could bias their judgment and possibly corrupt their integrity. Similarly, it's even more problematic when a group of people act as both judges and parties in a matter. Many important laws are like judicial decisions, but instead of focusing on individual rights, they address the rights of large groups of citizens. Different classes of lawmakers are like advocates or parties in the issues they decide. For example, if a law is proposed regarding private debts, the creditors are on one side and the debtors on the other. Justice should fairly balance both sides, but in reality, those who are most numerous or most powerful are likely to win. Shall domestic manufactures be encouraged, and in what degree by restrictions on foreign manufactures? Are questions which would be differently decided by the landed and the manufacturing classes, and probably by neither with a sole regard to justice and the public good. The apportionment of taxes on the various descriptions of property is an act which seems to require the most exact impartiality. Yet there is perhaps no legislative act in which greater opportunity and temptation are given to a predominant party to trample on the rules of justice. Every shilling with which they overburden the inferior number is a shilling saved to their own pockets. Should domestic manufacturing be encouraged, and to what extent, by placing restrictions on foreign goods? These questions would likely be answered differently by landowners and manufacturers, and probably not by either group with a sole focus on fairness and the public good. Deciding how to distribute taxes across different types of property should require the utmost fairness, yet it is perhaps the area where a dominant party has the greatest chance and temptation to ignore justice. Every extra penny they impose on the smaller group is a penny saved for themselves. It is in vain to say that enlightened statesmen will be able to adjust these clashing interests and render them all subservient to the public good. Enlightened statesmen will not always be at the helm, nor, in many cases, can such an adjustment be made at all without taking into view indirect and remote considerations, which will rarely prevail over the immediate interest which one party may find in disregarding the rights of another or the good of the whole. The inference to which we are brought is that the causes of faction cannot be removed, and that relief is only to be sought in the means of controlling its effects. It is unrealistic to think that wise leaders will always be able to balance these conflicting interests and make them serve the public good. Enlightened leaders won't always be in charge, and in many cases it's impossible to resolve these issues without considering indirect and distant factors, which will often be overshadowed by the immediate interests of one party, who may choose to ignore the rights of others or the overall good. The conclusion we reach is that the causes of factions cannot be removed, and the only solution is to find ways to control their effects. If a faction consists of less than a majority, relief is supplied by the Republican principle, which enables the majority to defeat its sinister views by regular vote. It may clog the administration, it may convulse the society, but it will be unable to execute and mask its violence under the forms of the Constitution. When a majority is included in a faction, the form of popular government, on the other hand, enables it to sacrifice to its ruling passion or interest both the public good and the rights of other citizens. To secure the public good and private rights against the danger of such a faction, and at the same time to preserve the spirit and the form of popular government, is then the great object to which our inquiries are directed. Let me add that it is the great desideratum by which this form of government can be rescued from the opprobrium under which it has so long labored, and be recommended to the esteem and adoption of mankind. If a faction is made up of a minority, the principles of a republic provide a solution. The majority can override its harmful intentions through a regular vote. While the minority faction may disrupt government operations and create disorder in society, it will not be able to carry out its agenda or disguise its actions under the Constitution. However, if a faction includes a majority, a democratic system allows it to impose its own interests or passions at the expense of both the public good and the rights of others. The challenge, then, is to protect both the public good and individual rights from such a majority faction while still preserving the principles and structure of popular government. Achieving this balance is essential, not only to ensure the success of this form of government, but also to remove the negative reputation it has long suffered and to prove its value to the world. By what means is this object attainable? Evidently by one of two only. Either the existence of the same passion or interest in a majority at the same time must be prevented, or the majority, having such coexistent passion or interest, must be rendered by their number and local situation unable to concert and carry into effect schemes of oppression. If the impulse and the opportunity be suffered to coincide, we well know that neither moral nor religious motives can be relied on as an adequate control. They are not found to be such on the injustice and violence of individuals, and lose their efficacy in proportion to the number combined together, that is, in proportion as their efficacy becomes needful. How can we achieve this goal? There are only two possible ways. 1. Preventing a majority from having the same passion or interest at the same time. 2. Ensuring that even if a majority does share a common passion or interest, their numbers and geographic distribution make it difficult for them to coordinate and carry out oppressive actions. If both the motivation and the opportunity to act unjustly exist at the same time, We cannot rely on moral or religious principles alone to prevent wrongdoing. These principles are not enough to stop individuals from committing acts of injustice and violence, and their influence weakens as more people join together, precisely when they are needed most. From this view of the subject, it may be concluded that a pure democracy, by which I mean a society consisting of a small number of citizens who assemble and administer the government in person, can admit of no cure for the mischiefs of faction. A common passion or interest will, in almost every case, be felt by a majority of the whole. A communication and concert result from the form of government itself, and there is nothing to check the inducements to sacrifice the weaker party or an obnoxious individual. Hence it is that such democracies have ever been spectacles of turbulence and contention, have ever been found incompatible with personal security or the rights of property, and have in general been as short in their lives as they have been violent in their deaths. Theoretic politicians, who have patronized this species of government, have erroneously supposed that by reducing mankind to a perfect equality in their political rights, they would, at the same time, be perfectly equalized and assimilated in their possessions, their opinions, and their passions. From this perspective, we can conclude that a pure democracy, where a small group of citizens directly manage the government, cannot prevent the dangers of faction. In most cases, the majority will share a common passion or interest, and because they can easily communicate and coordinate, nothing stops them from oppressing the weaker group or targeting individuals they dislike. This is why such democracies have always been marked by instability and conflict. They have consistently failed to protect personal security or property rights, and have generally been both short-lived and destructive. Some political theorists have mistakenly believed that giving everyone equal political rights would also make them equal in wealth, opinions, and desires. But history shows this is not the case. A republic, by which I mean a government in which the scheme of representation takes place, opens a different prospect and promises the cure for which we are seeking. Let us examine the points in which it varies from pure democracy, and we shall comprehend both the nature of the cure and the efficacy which it must derive from the union. The two great points of difference between a democracy and a republic are, first, the delegation of the government, in the latter, to a small number of citizens elected by the rest. Secondly, the greater number of citizens and greater sphere of country, over which the latter may be extended. A republic, meaning a government where citizens elect representatives to make decisions, offers a different approach and a potential solution to the problem of faction. To understand why, we need to look at how it differs from a pure democracy. The two key differences are: 1. In a republic, government authority is given to a small group of elected representatives, rather than being exercised directly by the people. 2. A republic can govern a larger population and a wider geographical area than a pure democracy. These differences help control the effects of factions and make the government more stable and effective, especially when applied to a united nation. The effect of the first difference is, on the one hand, to refine and enlarge the public views by passing them through the medium of a chosen body of citizens, whose wisdom may best discern the true interest of their country, and whose patriotism and love of justice will be least likely to sacrifice it to temporary or partial considerations. Under such a regulation, it may well happen that the public voice, pronounced by the representatives of the people, will be more consonant to the public good than if pronounced by the people themselves, convened for the purpose. On the other hand, the effect may be inverted. Men of factious tempers, of local prejudices, or of sinister designs may, by intrigue, by corruption, or by other means, first obtain the suffrages and then betray the interests of the people. The question resulting is whether small or extensive republics are more favorable to the election of proper guardians of the public weal, and it is clearly decided in favor of the latter by two obvious considerations. The first difference has two possible effects. On the positive side, it helps refine and expand public opinion by filtering it through a selected group of citizens who are wise enough to understand the true interests of the country, and who are less likely to act based on short-term or selfish motives. With this system, the decisions made by elected representatives may better serve the public good than if the people themselves gathered to decide directly. However, the system can also have the opposite effect. If corrupt, biased, or self-serving individuals gain power through manipulation, bribery, or other dishonest tactics, they can win elections and then betray the public's trust. In the first place, it is to be remarked that, however small the republic may be, the representatives must be raised to a certain number in order to guard against the cabals of a few, and that, however large it may be, they must be limited to a certain number in order to guard against the confusion of a multitude. Hence, the number of representatives in the two cases not being in proportion to that of the two constituents, and being proportionally greater in the small republic, it follows that, if the proportion of fit characters be not less in the large than in the small republic, the former will present a greater option and consequently a greater probability of a fit choice. This raises the question, are smaller or larger republics better at electing the right leaders? The answer clearly favors larger republics for two key reasons. First, even in a small republic, there must be enough representatives to prevent a few individuals from dominating decision-making. At the same time, even in a large republic, the number of representatives must be limited to avoid chaos. Because smaller republics have a relatively higher number of representatives compared to their population size, a larger republic is more likely to have a wider pool of qualified candidates, increasing the chances of electing capable leaders. In the next place, as each representative will be chosen by a greater number of citizens in the large than in the small republic, it will be more difficult for unworthy candidates to practice with success the vicious arts by which elections are too often carried, and the suffrages of the people being more free, will be more likely to center in men who possess the most attractive merit and the most diffusive and established characters. In a larger republic, each representative is chosen by a greater number of people than in a smaller one. This makes it harder for unqualified candidates to use deceitful tactics to win elections. With a larger voting base, corruption and manipulation become less effective, allowing the people to vote more freely. As a result, they are more likely to elect candidates who are truly deserving, those with strong reputations and widely recognized abilities. It must be confessed that in this, as in most other cases, there is a mean on both sides of which inconveniences will be found to lie. By enlarging too much the number of electors, you render the representatives too little acquainted with all their local circumstances and lesser interests, as by reducing it too much, you render him unduly attached to these, and too little fit to comprehend and pursue great and national objects. The federal Constitution forms a happy combination in this respect, the great and aggregate interests being referred to the national, the local, and particular to the state legislatures. In this case, as in many others, there is a balance to be struck, with problems arising if you go too far in either direction. If too many people are involved in choosing a representative, that representative may not be familiar with the specific local issues and concerns of their constituents. On the other hand, if too few people are involved, the representative may become too focused on local matters and fail to understand or address larger national priorities. The federal Constitution strikes a good balance by assigning broad, national issues to the federal government while leaving local and specific concerns to the state legislatures. The other point of difference is the greater number of citizens and extent of territory which may be brought within the compass of Republican than of Democratic government. And it is this circumstance principally which renders factious combinations less to be dreaded in the former than in the latter. The smaller the society, the fewer probably will be the distinct parties and interests composing it. The fewer the distinct parties and interests, the more frequently will a majority be found of the same party, and the smaller the number of individuals composing a majority, and the smaller the compass within which they are placed, the more easily will they concert and execute their plans of oppression. Extend the sphere, and you take in a greater variety of parties and interests. You make it less probable that a majority of the whole will have a common motive to invade the rights of other citizens. Or if such a common motive exists, it will be more difficult for all who feel it to discover their own strength and to act in unison with each other. Besides other impediments, it may be remarked that where there is a consciousness of unjust or dishonorable purposes, communication is always checked by distrust in proportion to the number whose concurrence is necessary. Another key difference is that a republic can govern a larger population and a bigger territory than a pure democracy. This is important because it makes it harder for dangerous factions to form and take control. In a small society, there are fewer competing groups and interests. With fewer divisions, it's more likely that one party will form a majority. When that majority is made up of only a small number of people within a confined space, it becomes much easier for them to coordinate and impose their will on others. However, in a larger republic, there are many more groups with different interests. This diversity makes it less likely that a single majority will emerge with a common goal to oppress others. Even if such a majority does exist, it will be harder for its members to recognize their collective strength and coordinate their actions. Additionally, when people are aware that their motives are unjust or dishonorable, they are less likely to communicate and organize effectively because they don't fully trust one another, especially as the number of people involved increases. Hence, it clearly appears that the same advantage which a republic has over a democracy in controlling the effects of faction is enjoyed by a large over a small republic, is enjoyed by the Union over the states composing it. Does the advantage consist in the substitution of representatives whose enlightened views and virtuous sentiments render them superior to local prejudices and schemes of injustice? It will not be denied that the representation of the Union will be most likely to possess these requisite endowments. Does it consist in the greater security afforded by a greater variety of parties, against the event of any one party being able to outnumber and oppress the rest? In an equal degree does the increased variety of parties comprised within the Union increase this security. Does it, in fine, consist in the greater obstacles opposed to the concert and accomplishment of the secret wishes of an unjust and interested majority? Here again, the extent of the Union gives it the most palpable advantage. It is clear that just as a republic is better than a pure democracy at controlling the dangers of factions, a large republic is better at this than a small one, and the Union as a whole is better than individual states. Is this advantage due to having representatives with broader knowledge and stronger moral character, making them less likely to be influenced by local biases or engage in unfair schemes? If so, it's undeniable that the Union's representatives are more likely to have these qualities. Is the advantage found in the fact that a larger variety of political groups makes it harder for any single party to gain enough power to dominate and oppress others? If so, the Union's wider range of interests provides even greater protection. Finally, is it because a larger republic makes it more difficult for a selfish and unjust majority to secretly organize and carry out its plans? Once again, the Union's size gives it a clear advantage in preventing such dangers. The influence of factious leaders may kindle a flame within their particular states, but will be unable to spread a general conflagration through the other states. A religious sect may degenerate into a political faction in a part of the Confederacy, but the variety of sects dispersed over the entire face of it must secure the national councils against any danger from that source. A rage for paper money, for an abolition of debts, for an equal division of property, or for any other improper or wicked project, will be less apt to pervade the whole body of the Union than a particular member of it, in the same proportion as such a malady is more likely to taint a particular county or district than an entire state. Influential faction leaders might stir up trouble within their own states, but they won't be able to spread chaos across the entire country. A religious group might turn into a political faction in one part of the Union, but the sheer number of different religious sects spread across the nation will prevent any single one from dominating national politics. Similarly, Extreme movements, whether pushing for paper money, canceling debts, redistributing property, or any other reckless or harmful idea, are far more likely to take hold in a single state than across the entire Union. Just as a disease is more likely to infect one county or district than an entire state, dangerous political movements are more easily contained within smaller areas rather than spreading nationwide. In the extent and proper structure of the Union, therefore, we behold a Republican remedy for the diseases most incident to Republican government. And according to the degree of pleasure and pride we feel in being Republicans, ought to be our zeal in cherishing the spirit and supporting the character of Federalists. Publius. The size and structure of the Union provide a solution to the problems that commonly arise in Republican governments. If we take pride and satisfaction in being Republicans, we should be just as committed to upholding the spirit and principles of federalism. Publius. Summary. Federalist Paper. Number 10, written by James Madison, focuses on the problem of factions and how a well-structured republic can mitigate their negative effects. Here are its key principles. 1. The danger of factions. Factions are groups of citizens united by a common interest that may be harmful to the rights of others or the public good. They are inevitable due to human nature, but must be controlled. 2. Causes of factions. The primary cause of factions is the unequal distribution of property and differing interests among people. Since these differences are natural, factions cannot be eliminated without destroying liberty itself. 3. Controlling the effects of factions. Since factions cannot be removed, their influence must be managed. A well-constructed government can prevent any single faction from becoming dominant and oppressing others. 4. Republic versus pure democracy. A pure democracy, where citizens vote directly on laws, cannot control factions effectively because the majority can easily oppress the minority. A republic, where elected representatives govern, provides a solution by refining public opinion and filtering it through a more knowledgeable and just group of representatives. 5. Large republic versus small republic. A larger republic is superior to a small one because it includes a greater diversity of factions and interests, making it less likely that a single faction will dominate. More voters and candidates mean a higher chance of electing qualified representatives. 6. Federalism as a safeguard. The Union, with its structure of both state and national governments, provides an additional layer of protection against factionalism. Local issues are handled by state legislatures, while national concerns are addressed by the federal government, balancing power. Core idea. A well-structured large republic, like the United States, is the best defense against the dangers of factionalism because it disperses power, ensures a diversity of interests, and makes it harder for any one group to gain unchecked control. That concludes the 13th class in this series on Federalist Paper 10. I hope you found this information helpful and entertaining. I will see you in Class 14, where we will cover Federalist Paper 24. Fall out!